For over 60 years, if you asked a geneticist where Japanese people came from, you'd get the same clean two-part answer: ancient hunter-gatherers, plus later farmers from the mainland mixed together, done. Textbooks taught it. Museums built exhibits around it. It had a name, the dual structure model, and it was about as settled as population genetics gets. Then researchers sequenced the actual bones, and the two-part story turned out to be missing an entire chapter. The dual structure model was proposed back in the 1990s by Japanese anthropologist Kazuo Hanihara, originally based on skeletal and facial measurements from ancient remains. The idea: modern Japanese people descend from two founding populations. First, the Jomon indigenous hunter-gatherers who'd lived across the Japanese archipelago for thousands of years, going back to roughly 13,000 BCE, known for some of the oldest pottery ever found anywhere on Earth. Second, the Yayoi, a wave of migrants arriving from the Asian mainland, starting somewhere around 1000 to 300 BCE, bringing wet rice farming with them. Under this model, those two groups gradually mixed over centuries, and that mixture is what produced the modern Japanese population. For decades, genetic evidence, mitochondrial DNA, Y chromosome markers, broad population level SNP studies kept lining up with this story well enough that almost nobody seriously questioned the basic two-part framework. The problem wasn't that the dual structure model was built on bad evidence. It's that, for a very long time, nobody had actually sequenced full ancient genomes from enough individuals across enough different time periods to test it properly. Skeletal measurements and scattered genetic markers can support a theory without ever being detailed enough to seriously challenge it. That changed with a study led by Shigeki Nakagome, a genomic medicine researcher at Trinity College Dublin, working alongside researchers including Neil Cook, Takashi Gakuhari, and Daniel Bradley. The team sequenced full genomes from the actual bones of 12 individuals who lived in Japan across 3 distinct archaeological periods: the Jomon period, the Yayoi period, and a later period called Kofun, running roughly from the 3rd to the 7th century CE, a time associated with the emergence of centralized political states in Japan and the large keyhole-shaped burial mounds the period is named after. If the dual structure model were the whole story, the genomes from all 3 periods should have fit neatly along one continuous line. Jomon ancestry gradually getting diluted by a single wave of Yayoi-related mainland ancestry, then staying roughly stable from that point forward. That's not what the genomes showed. The Kofun period individuals carried ancestry that didn't match either the Jomon or the Yayoi genetic profile particularly well. It was a third, distinct signal, a separate East Asian ancestral population that appears to have arrived in a later migration wave, layered on top of the earlier Jomon and Yayoi mixing, roughly coinciding with the period when centralized state structures were forming in Japan. Nakagome put the significance of this plainly in the team's public statement. Instead of the dual ancestry model that had been held for a significant time, the data pointed to what the researchers called a tripartite model. 3 ancestral populations, not 2, each contributing meaningfully to modern Japanese genetic ancestry, arriving in 3 separate stages tied to 3 distinct chapters of Japanese prehistory: the foraging Jomon era, the agricultural Yayoi transition, and the Kofun era state formation period. The actual proportions are worth sitting with because they're not evenly split. Based on the original 12 genome analysis, modern Japanese people carry roughly 13% Jomon-related ancestry, about 16% Yayoi-related ancestry, and the majority, around 71%, tracing to that later Kofun period population. That third group, the one nobody had previously identified as genetically distinct at all, turned out to be the single largest ancestral contributor to the modern Japanese gene pool. Not a minor correction to the existing model. The dominant piece of it, hiding in plain sight the entire time, simply because nobody had sequenced deeply enough into that specific period to notice it was genetically separate from the Yayoi wave that came before it. A follow-up study, led by researchers including Professor Naoto Tomioka of Okayama University of Science and published in the journal Science Advances, expanded on these findings with additional ancient genomes and cross-checked the tripartite pattern against a broader dataset. The results held up. According to that team's account, the ancestors of the Jomon people originally split off from a shared continental population somewhere between 20,000 and 15,000 years ago, arriving in Japan as a relatively small founding group of roughly 1,000 individuals. Then, during the Yayoi period, a group with Northeast Asian ancestry arrived and mixed with that established Jomon population. Then, separately, during the Kofun period, a genetically distinct East Asian population arrived and mixed in again, a second, independent wave layered on top of the first mixing event, not a continuation of it. There's a genuinely interesting physical detail buried in this research too, something that goes beyond just ancestry percentages. Comparing the Jomon genomes to the later migrant populations, researchers found the Jomon people were, on average, genetically shorter and carried genetic markers associated with higher blood sugar and higher triglyceride levels than the agricultural migrants who arrived later. The likely explanation ties directly back to lifestyle. The Jomon were hunter-gatherers, relying far less on carbohydrate-heavy farming than the rice-cultivating Yayoi and Kofun-era populations that followed them, and their genetics appear to reflect an adaptation suited to that different way of eating and living, sustaining higher baseline blood sugar levels adapted to a diet without a steady carbohydrate supply. The tripartite model doesn't apply evenly across every part of Japan either, which adds another layer researchers have kept investigating since the original 2021 findings. The Ainu people of Hokkaido in the north and the Ryukyuan people of Okinawa in the south are geographically about as far apart as you can get within the Japanese archipelago. Genetically, though, they're unusually close to each other, both carrying significantly higher proportions of Jomon ancestry than the mainland Yamato Japanese population sitting in between them. A more recent study, focused specifically on the southern Ryukyu Islands, confirmed the tripartite structure fits that region too, but with notably higher Jomon ancestry than found on the mainland, suggesting the later migration waves, particularly the Kofun period one, had a much larger genetic impact on central Japan than they did on the geographic edges of the archipelago. The pattern reads less like one smooth, even wave of migration spreading evenly across every island, and more like layered migrations concentrating more heavily in some regions than others, leaving the outer edges of the archipelago as something closer to genetic time capsules of the earlier populations. None of this is really a story about anyone being wrong for 60 years. The dual structure model was a genuinely reasonable, well-supported theory built on the tools available at the time: skeletal measurements, limited genetic markers, population-level statistics. It got the broad outline right. Japan's population really did form from indigenous hunter-gatherers mixing with later mainland migrants. What it couldn't do was resolve two separate migration waves that happened to be pointing in roughly the same general direction, arriving from the general vicinity of the Asian mainland at different points, centuries apart. It took full ancient genomes, sequenced directly from Jomon, Yayoi, and Kofun era remains, sitting side by side for direct comparison, to finally see that later mainland migrants wasn't one event. It was two, separated by hundreds of years, each with its own distinct genetic signature, each corresponding to a different specific chapter of Japanese history, farming's arrival, and then, centuries later, the formation of centralized political states. Nakagome summed up what the research group had actually been missing before this. They'd been learning more and more about the cultures of the Jomon, Yayoi, and Kofun periods as more archaeological artifacts turned up over the decades, but relatively little about the genetic story running underneath all of it, specifically how the agricultural transition and the later state formation period had each separately shaped the population. Now there's a name for what that third, previously invisible wave actually was, and a rough sense of how much of the modern Japanese gene pool it built, the largest single share of it, arriving quietly, centuries after the story was supposedly already finished.